The Dowager Duchess of Marchmont put her body across her own front door to keep me out of it, and I want you to understand that I had not yet said a single word. I had stepped down from the Duke's carriage onto the gravel of a house I had spent 27 years preparing to enter, and I had lifted my eyes to the great pillared front of Marchment. And there at the top of the steps stood a woman of 49 in grey silk, straight as a blade, with her hands spread against the open doorframe as though the house behind her were a child she would die before surrendering. She was beautiful still, in the cold way that frightened people are beautiful. And she looked at me the way you look at a thing you have already killed once and find, impossibly, standing in your drive. "You will not bring that woman inside this house," she said. She did not say it to me. She said it to her son, the Duke, who had handed me down and was even now coming around the carriage with his hat in his hand and a furrow of pure bewilderment between his brows. Edmund had warned me his mother was proud. He had not warned me of this, because he had not known this existed in her. How could he? He was 25. The thing she was guarding had been buried 3 years before he was born. "Mother," his voice went, as it did under strain, very quiet rather than loud. That was the first thing I had ever loved about him, that he grew still, where other men grew large. "You have not met her. You do not know her name. I do not need her name." But her eyes had dropped, and I saw where they had fallen, and I understood that she was lying. She had fixed on the small enamel locket at my throat, a faded blue forget-me-not, older than I was, the only thing of my mother's I had ever owned, and the colour was going out of the dowager's face in a slow tide, from the brow down, the way it leaves a drowned woman. She knew that locket. She had last seen it on the throat of a woman she had sent to the far side of the world to die. I did not argue. I did not step back. I had imagined this moment so many times, in so many tempers, that when it finally came I found I had no temper left at all, only a great cold steadiness, like the surface of a pond in January. I looked up at the Duke, the man I had let myself love against my own better sense, and I said the only thing I had come to say. Ask her, I told him, what she did in the winter of 1842. For a moment there was no sound at all but the horses shifting and the wind in the elms. Edmund looked at me, and then at his mother, and the bewilderment on his face began, very slowly, to curdle into something else, because his mother, the Dowager Duchess of Marchmont, who had never in his life retreated from anything, had just taken one step backward into her own hall, as though I had struck her. And there, on the steps, with the whole front of that enormous house watching, was the question I had carried like a stone in my chest since I was old enough to be told the truth. The question I could see catch and burn in Edmund's eyes. What could a penniless music teacher possibly know about a duchess, that the duchess would sooner bar her own son from his door than let it be spoken aloud? I should tell you how I came to be standing there, because it was not the way she thought. She thought I had hunted her son. She told him so. Later, in the cold drawing-room where she received me only because Edmund forced the matter, that I was an adventuress, a fortune hunter, that I had set my cap at a duke to climb out of the gutter I had crawled from. It is the easiest accusation in the world to make against a woman with no money and a great deal of composure, and she made it well, because she had once been such a woman herself, and knew exactly how it was done. The truth was duller and harder. I had not gone looking for Edmund. I had been 3 years companion to old Lady Wexley at Bath, who had left me at her death the sum of £300 a year. A small thing to the people in that drawing-room. An entire universe to me, the first money in my life that no one could take back. With it I had set up as a teacher of music, which I was good at, and I had been teaching the pianoforte to Edmund's young orphaned cousin when the Duke first came to fetch the child, and stayed, against all custom, to listen. What he noticed, he told me this much later, was that I did not stop playing. The room had filled with titled people come to look at the new Duke, and they had set themselves to rattle the music teacher the way a cat bats at a moth, and I had simply gone on playing the back as though none of them were in the room, because I had learned a long time ago that the surest way to survive being looked at is to refuse to perform being looked at. He said he had spent his whole life in rooms full of people performing, and that I was the first person he had ever watched decline. What I noticed about him was the scar through his left eyebrow, white against the brown, and that his eyes were the brown of strong tea, and that when his aunt said something cutting he did not laugh and he did not bristle. He simply waited, gone very still, until the unkindness had nowhere left to stand. I thought, there is a man who has learned the same thing I have, only from the other side of the glass. He came back. That is the part I had no defense against. A duke who has admired a music teacher need never come back, and the kind ones make sure they do not, because they know what their coming back does to a woman with £300 a year and a name no one has heard. Edmund came back every week, on the pretext of his cousin's lessons, and sat at the back of the room where I could not quite ignore him. And one afternoon when the child had been sent for her tea, he stayed, with the door open and the housekeeper rattling cups in the next room for propriety, and we had the first real conversation of my life with a man of his rank. "You play as though you are arguing with someone," he said. "Who is it?" I might have said something graceful. I was tired, that day, of being graceful. "My mother," I said. "She died when I was a child, and I never finished telling her what I thought, and the only place I have ever been able to is the keyboard." "You will think that absurd." "I think," he said, after one of those silences in which other men would have filled the air, "that it is the least absurd thing anyone has said to me in this house. I argue with my father. He has been dead 9 years, and I argue with him daily. I had not known one could do it at a pianoforte. It seems a great deal more dignified than the way I do it, which is at 3 in the morning with the brandy." I laughed before I could stop myself, and he looked so quietly pleased to have caused it that I had to turn back to the keys. "They will tell you not to come here," I said to the music, because someone had to say the true thing. "Your aunt, the county, they are already telling you. A duke does not sit through a child's scales to hear the teacher play Bach. They are telling me," he agreed. "I find I have stopped listening. I spent 18 years being told what a duke does. I was a second son until my brother's horse went down, and no one troubled to tell me what a duke does until I was suddenly required to be one. And I have concluded that a great many of the things a duke does are simply things frightened men decided a long time ago and have been too frightened to revise." He stood to go, turning his hat in his hands. "I should like to revise one of them. Will you let me call on you properly, Miss Hale, with all the tedious correctness, so that no one, including you, can say it was anything but meant? No one had ever, in my whole careful life, asked my leave for anything." I said yes, to the keys, not trusting my face, and heard him go out smiling. I knew whose son he was. I knew it the moment I heard the name Marchment, and I felt it go through me like cold water. And I told myself, I swear to you I told myself, that the past was buried, and the woman who had buried it was an old woman now, and that I would take my £300 and my pianoforte and my one good life, and leave the dead to the dead. And then he asked me to come to Marchment, and I found that I could not, after all, leave the dead to the dead. Not while the woman who had made them dead still poured tea in a fine house and called herself Your Grace. I told myself I would only look. I packed my mother's locket, and the letters and the thing I had spent 11 years assembling, because a careful woman does not walk toward a fire without knowing where the water is. And I went. So she was right that I was hiding something. She was only wrong, catastrophically wrong, about what? Edmund would not put me out. That was the first crack in the wall, and it came in the cold drawing room within the hour, with the dowager seated like a magistrate and her son standing between us. "You will tell me," he said to her, quietly, always quietly, what Miss Hale meant the winter of 1842. "You will tell me, mother, because I have never in my life seen you afraid, and I find I cannot rest until I know what a stranger could say that would frighten you." "She is a liar and a climber," the dowager said. "I will not dignify, then dignify this." He turned to me, and there was a plea in it I had not expected, and did not want, because it would have been so much easier to do this to a man I did not pity. "Miss Hale, Clara, whatever it is, say it now to my face and let me judge." And there it was, the thing I had not planned for. I had planned for her. I had not planned for him asking me, with his father's eyes, to set a torch to his whole life on the strength of my word alone. I looked at the dowager, and I saw that she had recovered enough to gamble, that she was betting I would not dare, that she had spent 27 years learning that frightened women do not speak, and the ones who do are not believed. "Not yet," I said. To him, "I will not hand you a thing this large and ask you to take it on faith and break your own house in half because a stranger wept prettily in your drawing room. You would always wonder. So would I." I stood. "Give me until I can put it in your hand, Your Grace, so that you need not believe me at all. You need only read." The dowager's mouth curved, just slightly, because she thought I had blinked. She did not understand that I had just refused her the one thing she needed, which was for me to overreach and be dismissed. I had played the buck. I had declined to perform. She made her first move that same week, and she made it in public, which was a measure of how badly the locket had shaken her. For Constance, Dowager Duchess of Marchmont, did nothing in public that she could do behind a door, unless fear had got into her blood. There was a dinner, the county gathered, the kind of evening at which a great lady's word is law, and a music teacher is meant to be grateful for the chair. Over the soup, in a voice pitched to carry the length of the table, the dowager turned to me with her terrible composure and said, "Miss Hale, I have taken the liberty of inquiring into your people. One does, when one's son brings home a stranger. I find your mother was a woman named Margaret Hale." A pause, exquisitely timed, while the table leaned in. "Convicted at the assizes in the year 43 of the wilful murder of her own mistress, and transported for the term of her natural life. She died a felon in a penal colony. That is the blood, Your Graces, that has been seated at this table tonight." It was true. That is the cruelty of it. Every word of it was true, and there is no defense against the truth used as a knife. I felt the table recoil from me, felt the kind faces close like shutters, felt Edmund go rigid at the head of it. The dowager had reached into the grave and pulled out my mother's ruin and laid it steaming on the cloth, and she had done it knowing it would near enough finish me, that a man, even a good man, even Edmund, might forgive poverty and obscurity, but would balk at the daughter of a murderess across his table. It nearly worked. I will not pretend it did not. I sat in the silence with my mother's name turned into a weapon, and felt 27 years of it pressed down on my chest at once. And then I did the thing I had been raised by my Aunt Frances to do, which was to tell the truth so plainly that it had nowhere to hide. "My mother," I said into the dreadful quiet, "was convicted of poisoning the woman she served. Lady Rosalind Carew, who was, at the time of her death, betrothed to be married." I let it sit. I looked, not at the table but straight down its length at the Dowager Duchess. "Betrothed, Your Graces, to the late Duke of Marchment. The gentleman this lady married instead, within the year. I watched her understand that I had not come unarmed, and I watched the table. Slower. But they got there. Begin to do the arithmetic she had spent 27 years praying no one would do. A betrothed lady dies. Her companion hangs for it, or near enough, and the poor cousin keeping house in the same household marries the bereaved duke and becomes a duchess. It is a very old story, and every soul at that table knew it was a very old story, and you could see the knowledge moving across their faces like a draught. "How dare you?" the Dowager breathed. "I dare," I said, "because I am the only person left alive who was there in the house, and is not afraid of you. My mother was afraid of you. Lady Rosalind, at the end, was afraid of you. I have had 27 years to use up all the fear I was born with. There is none of it left." That was the first time I saw Edmund truly look at his mother, not as a son looks at the only parent he has, but as a man looks at a stranger he has just discovered living inside someone he trusted. And it broke my heart a little even then, because I had done that to him, and there was no undoing it, and I would do it again. He came to me that night, against every rule that governs such houses, in the small parlour where his aunt had grudgingly lodged me with a maid sleeping across the door for propriety's sake. He did not come for what men sometimes come for. He came because he could not be in the same house as his mother and breathe. "Is it true?" he said. Not whether my mother was convicted. He had moved past that. "What you let them understand at dinner? That he could not say it. A Duke of England, and he could not put his own mother and the word murder in the same sentence. I think your mother killed Lady Rosalind Carew so that she might have your father and his title," I said. Gently. Because there is no gentle way, and I tried anyway, and I think she let my mother hang for it. And when my mother did not hang, when the sentence was transportation instead, I think she counted herself unlucky, and went on with her tea. I have spent 11 years finding out whether I was right. I am right, Edmund. I can prove it. That is the thing I will not say until I can lay it in your hand. He sat down very slowly in the one good chair. This man who owned the chair and the house and the county it stood in. And he put his scarred face in his hands. And here is the strange thing. The thing I had not let myself expect. He did not defend her. He did not rage at me or call me a liar or order the carriage. He sat in my mother's daughter's borrowed parlour and grieved, openly, for the life he had thought he had, and I crossed the room without deciding to, and put my hand on the bent back of his neck, and we stayed like that, too close, breaking every rule the house had, while the candle guttered. He lifted his head. We were a hand's breadth apart. I could feel the warmth come off him, and I wanted, God forgive me, in the middle of all of it I wanted, and his eyes went to my mouth and mine to his, and the whole room held its breath. His hand came up, and his thumb found the edge of my jaw, not pulling, only resting there, asking, and I understood that whatever happened next I would be the one to decide it, and that he would carry the not deciding as gently as he would have carried the kiss. I have been wanted before. I had never, until that moment, been asked. It was the asking that nearly undid me, more than the warmth, more than the wanting. A breath, and I would have closed the last inch myself. The maid stirred behind the door. A board creaked, and we came apart like two people surfacing from deep water, neither of us having done the thing that would have changed everything, both of us knowing the not doing had changed it anyway. "When you can lay it in my hand," he said, hoarse, at the door, "lay it in mine. Not the magistrate's, mine first. I owe her that much, to be the one who," he stopped. "No, I owe you that much. Whatever it costs me." That was the moment he chose, and he chose it before he knew whether choosing me would cost him his mother, his name, or only his peace. He chose in the dark, with no witnesses but a sleeping maid, which is the only kind of choosing that counts. I should have known she would not wait to be reckoned with. Hunted things do not wait. They run, and when they cannot run, they bite. I had one day in which I wrote to Mr. Aldous, the apothecary's son in the town where it had all happened. The man who had inherited his father's shop, and with it, his father's old-day books, the private ledgers in which his father had recorded, in his own careful hand, every sale of every dangerous thing across 40 years, including a sale, in the winter of 1842, of arsenic, to a young woman who signed herself Miss Constance Merrow. I had found Mr. Aldous 2 years before. I had read the entry with my own eyes. I had asked him to keep the book safe and to come if I ever sent for him, and he had said he would, because his father had gone to his grave troubled by that trial, and the day book no one ever came to ask for. I sent for him. And then the Dowager made her second move, and it was the cleverest and the cruelest thing she did, because it turned her own crime into my crime. Her men came at dawn, not constables, her men, and they had a magistrate with them, an old friend of the house, and a charge already sworn. That I, Clara Hale, a felon's daughter and a fortune hunter, had come to Marchmont to extort money from the Dowager Duchess by the threat of a monstrous and unprovable slander. They took my writing case. They took my mother's letters, every one, and the copies I had made over 11 years, and that evening, in the great hall where the family burned its rubbish, the Dowager Duchess burned them herself. I was told this later by a housemaid who wept telling me, fed my mother's letters into the fire, one at a time with the tongs, believing as the ash went up the chimney that she was burning the last proof on earth that she had ever held a thing called arsenic in her hand. And they took my locket. They took my mother's locket from around my throat as they took me away, because it was evidence, and I stood in the magistrate's cold anteroom that night with my throat bare for the first time since I was a child, branded an extortioner, my proof in ashes, the Duke held back at his own gate by his own mother's men. And I understood, really understood, in my body, exactly what my mother had felt the night they took her. The wheel had come all the way around. I was going to lose, the way she had lost, in the same house, to the same woman, and the man I loved was going to be told a story about me that he would spend the rest of his life unsure whether to believe. That was the cost, and I paid it in full, alone, in a stone room, with my hand at my empty throat. But the Dowager Duchess had burned the wrong papers, and she had done the thing she always did, the thing that had made her and would now unmake her. She had assumed that a woman with no rank had no resources she did not carry on her own person. Mr. Aldous arrived in the town the next morning, an hour before the magistrate convened to commit me, carrying under his arm a calf-bound day-book 40 years old, with a green silk marker laid in at the winter of 1842. He had read of the new scandal at Marchment in the county paper. He had not needed my summons after all. He had come, he told the room, because his father had died ashamed of having said nothing in 1843, and he would not die the same way. They had meant the hearing to bury me. The Dowager came to watch it done. That was her vanity. And it was the last mistake she ever made, seated in the front with her grey silk and her terrible straight spine. Certain, because she had burned my letters, that I had nothing left but my word against a duchess's. I asked the magistrate's leave to answer the charge. He could hardly refuse it. And I did not weep, and I did not rage. I had played the bark my whole life. I called Mr. Chair, Aldous, and I had him open his father's book to the winter of 1842, and I had him read, in his plain shopkeeper's voice, the entry in his dead father's hand, the date, the quantity, the poison, and the name of the young woman who had bought it and signed for it 3 weeks before Lady Rosalind Carew died, of what the physicians had called a sudden failure of the heart. Miss Constance Merrow, the name she had worn before she had a better one. The room turned. I felt it turn, the way I had felt the dinner table turn. Only this time it did not turn away from me. It turned toward the woman in grey silk in the front row, who had gone the colour of the ash she had made of my mother's letters. The Duke had come. He was standing at the back of the room. He had ridden through the night when he learned where they had taken me, and I want it known that he did not save me, because he could not have, because the only person in England who could prove my mother innocent was my mother's daughter and the book she had spent 11 years tracking down. But when the magistrate, shaken, asked whether anyone could speak to the character of the daybook and the shop, it was the Duke of Marchment who stood, in front of the county and his mother both, and said that the Carew betrothal was a matter of record in his own father's papers, that his father had grieved Lady Rosalind to the end of his life, and that he, Edmund, would stand surety for every word the daughter of Margaret Hale had spoken in that room. He chose her, me, out loud, at the cost of his own mother and his own name, with everyone watching. The Dowager rose. I think she meant to command the room the way she had commanded every room for 27 years. But there is a thing that happens to people who have built their whole lives on a single buried stone, when the stone is finally turned over in the light, and it happened to her there. She opened her mouth, and what came out was not command but the high, thin defence of a frightened girl of 22, that Rosalind had been weak, that the Duke would have tired of her, that she, Constance, would make a better Duchess and history would thank her, and the moment those words were in the air she heard them, and stopped, and knew she had confessed. Edmund crossed to me through the noise of it. He was white, and his hands were not steady, and he began, "Clara, I cannot tell you how, my own mother, in my own house, what was done to your mother. To you, don't." I caught his hand. "Your Grace." "Stop. Your sorrow is 27 years too late for the woman it belongs to, and she is past needing it, and so is my mother. Keep it. I don't want your sorrow." I held his eyes. "Tell me instead what you mean to do." And something in him steadied at being asked for the deed instead of forgiveness, the way a drowning man steadies when his foot finds the bottom. "What I mean to do," he said, loud enough for the magistrate in the county and the broken woman in grey, "is see Margaret Hale's conviction overturned in the same court that pronounced it, with her name read out clean. I mean to put her name on a stone, and I mean to ask you, Clara Hale, when there is no charge against you, and no debt between us, and nothing left for either of us to gain by it, whether you will let a man whose family owes yours a wrong that can never be paid spend the rest of his life trying to pay it anyway. Not as a debt, as a husband." "You may ask me," I said, and my voice was not as steady as I had kept it all that long day, "when my mother's name is clean." Not 1 hour before. He had them give me back my locket before they took the Dowager away. He fastened it himself. At my throat, his soldier steady hands gone clumsy with the small clasp, in front of everyone. And that, not the kiss that came after, in the corridor, when the pressure of all of it finally broke and we held on to each other like two people who had survived the same shipwreck 27 years apart. That was the moment I knew the wall I had built when I was a child and they took my mother had finally come down. Constance, Dowager Duchess of Marchmont, was tried at the same assizes that had once condemned my mother. She was old, and the law was gentler with a Duchess of 49 than it had been with a companion of 28. She was not hanged. She died within the year in a private confinement in the north, attended and fed and warm, which is more than my mother had, and I have made my peace with finding that I do not much mind the difference. Margaret Hale's conviction was struck down by the spring, her name read out in open court with the word innocent attached to it at last. And Edmund had a stone raised over the place where my aunt had told me, years before, my mother's bones had been tipped into colonial ground. A stone here, at home, with nothing under it but earth. Because the having of a place mattered more than the having of bones. It is there I keep the locket now. Not at my throat. I no longer need to wear my mother where everyone can see her. On the morning Edmund and I were married, quietly, with my Aunt Frances weeping in the front pew and Mr. Aldous, of all people, standing as a witness, I walked out to the stone first, alone, in the early light, and I laid the little blue forget-me-not locket against the cold granite for a moment, and I told my mother that the woman who had done it had been named at last out loud, in front of everyone, and that her daughter was about to be very happy, which I hoped she would not begrudge. By the autumn of the following year I stood at the window of the morning room at Marchment, the house whose door had been barred to me, mine now, the light coming in the way it does after rain, and watched the new Duke come up across the wet grass with that scar through his eyebrow, and that quiet that I had loved before I let myself know I loved it. Already half turned toward the window, because he had learned that I would be in it, and I thought of the woman on the gravel 2 winters before, with her bare nerve and her mother's locket, and the one cold sentence she had carried for 27 years. They told her she would not come inside the house. The Duke's own mother put her body across the door to keep the truth out of it. She did not argue. She did not step back. She only said, ask her what she did in the winter of 1842, and every plan that proud woman had made, for her secret and her name and her son, came undone from the moment the words left a music teacher's mouth on the steps of a house that would, in the end, be hers.